If we wave that magic wand and people could sit down and go, okay, here's how I feel. Here's how I grew up. Here's why I feel the way I feel. Here's what all of this story that I have in my head about me and the way the world works. Here's how this is all tying into how I'm reacting to the things that are going on. And then not say that you're not allowed to react the way you want to react, but say, be fully self-aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that we get less caught up in the quibbles about the things we're saying.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
The danger of a story that you hear on repeat, like, you're dangerous, you're broken, everyone else is the enemy, is the more you hear it, the more your brain starts to believe it. And that makes you not only easier to manipulate, but makes your life a lot more miserable. Look around. Today on Mad Warfare, we're examining what happens when we inherit stories we didn't choose, and how reclaiming authorship can create a more resilient sense of self and a more resilient society. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
I'm Sean Anthony Guillory.
And our guest today is an author, publisher, and also the communications director of Brink Literacy Project, a group helping people rewrite the stories they've inherited after being pushed to the brink. Please welcome Nate Ragolia.
Hello, thank you very much.
We're curious if you could tell us more about the origin story of Brink Literacy Project and how you found your way there.
So Brink was started by our CEO and founder, Danny Headland, back in 2007, I believe. She grew up in a rural town in Colorado, and she sort of observed how the overall narrative for herself and for other students in her high school was like, hey, you guys, you're not going to go anywhere. Like, you're going to end up working on your dad's ranch. You're going to end up getting into meth. You're going to end up basically like just, this is the dead end. Like, you're in a dead end place and you're a dead end person. A lot of Danny's things also was experiencing, like, she had dyslexia and other sort of learning disabilities when she was growing up. So she had a lot of teachers who sort of initially wrote her off as incapable and, you know, not as bright as she was. Her father kind of got her into reading and engaging with narrative through comic books. This unlocked something in Danny. Danny recognized that, like, yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who's feeling this way. A lot of people around me are feeling this way. So she started Brink and began with the idea that we were going to break that down. So we started doing a lot of teaching and education programs, working with justice impacted individuals, so lots of work in prisons, and then working with just kind of marginalized writers and new writers whose voices are less likely to be published in like the traditional Big Five sort of range. The whole premise here was, let's see how we can teach not only the narrative aspect, not only the literacy aspect, but how all of these things combine to really form your perspective on yourself, which in turn forms your perspective on the world and your potential and your engagement with it. Because ultimately, narrative and stories are the ways that we are constantly engaging with literally everything around us. And if we start addressing that, especially internally, we can really change how we feel about ourselves.
That's all music to my ears. How did you find your way here? And did you always grasp this power of storytelling?
I've been a writer my whole life. When I was a little kid, like, I was writing short stories in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie notebook that I had that was just like, and the thing's full. I still have it, but I have a notebook that's just full of random stories I was writing when I was like 9 years old. I always wanted to be a writer. When I finally got a book published in 2015, that sort of opened the door to me meeting Danny in the first place, because she read my book. The book's titled There You Feel Free. It's a little tricky to find now, but she read that book, and what I like to say is the best thing Twitter's ever done was it connected us, because she DM'd me and was like, hey, we read your book and we'd like to interview you about it. So we had met up over that and had initially talked around that time, and I got some sense of what they were doing with Brink and Friction that I didn't even know about, and understanding like, oh, you guys are really aligned with where I'm at. because I was seeing myself finding a lot of my friends who were also writers not being able to break through. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to create spaces because I think that's what we should do, right? When you get a win, you got to find a way to like open the stage a little wider so more people can come up because the standing ovation's better with everybody sharing. So it wasn't until really like 2020 that Danny reached out to me again and said, hey, you know, we're working on this big tarot project. And so they created this thing called the Literary Tarot. It was a Kickstarter project. It made almost $1 million on Kickstarter, and it was enough to basically save the nonprofit from going away entirely because of COVID.
Amazing.
She was like, hey, can you help with this? We need to try to sort of work on some of these cards. So I did a lot of research on tarot and talked to my wife who's into it and knows it, and I got a fast education in that. So I helped work on that project, and that sort of opened this door to where now we were working together directly. It just became like, hey, let's talk about ways that we can broaden the scope of communicating this mission because it's so cool. So we started talking about that, and then she was gracious enough to sort of bring me in, and I get to work alongside education and communications and doing customer service and doing interaction on socials and all these sort of ways that we're conveying our mission, but also, you know, the publishing aspect of our mission, which is the other important part, right? That Friction publishes a lot of it publishes the comics that some of our students who go through the Brink education programs to learn about their narrative and learn about how their story can be written and rewritten. They create a comic script. We pair them with a professional comic artist, and the comic is designed so that you have a 5 to 8 page comic memoir that really visually and in words conveys, hey, this young man went to prison because he was just involved in the criminality that his family was involved in. And it's like, well, what were the choices that were made to get to where this person is now? It's really eye-opening. We're always trying to find ways to convey not just empathy, but curiosity and empathy at the same time more. So the publishing aspect of it, which is something that I also really love, working on the journal and everything, is a huge aspect because it's about elevating these voices. So the internal change can be externalized to like, hey, look, world, people all around you are changing how they see themselves, and they're changing their lives for the better. So you can't just write people off as one thing that they'll always be just because of one thing that happened in their life or one thing they've done.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. So what are some of the mental hurdles for folks to kind of get past to really understand things around the power of narrative? Like off the top, I'm guessing folks would be like, oh, I just need to see the data. Just show me the spreadsheet and then, like I'll understand the whole story. And then are there certain groups that like immediately got it?
Overall, the big obstacle to getting this sort of understanding to go through is that everybody has their own narrative already. You have to convince someone that a person is not this settled entity based around one part of their story requires that person understanding that not only are they not a settled entity, but that the idea of settled entities is altogether kind of false. Like, you're not ever a static thing that is a permanent static thing. And so when you're talking to a certain group of people who may be reluctant to understand how narrative is impacting them or how narratives can shift or how things can change, you're dealing with all of the same barriers that you're dealing with in classroom initially. And it sort of depends on how reluctant someone is to overcome the idea of like, hey, negative self-talk is a real thing and we all do it, right? In a classroom standpoint, it's really interesting because each one of the cohorts of students that we work with, whether they're youth or adults, and whether they're directly like justice impacted, like they've been recently released from prison or they're currently serving or whatever, or if it's more of this is an at-risk population situation, the teachers do the whole thing kind of bespoke every single time. Like the initial sessions are about what is everybody about here and what do you all want to talk about and how comfortable do you feel about it? And then there's a lot of just kind of interesting, like working on breath, working on awareness and presence and these sorts of things that are kind of necessary to get comfortable, because it's really about a safety issue too. To change your personal narrative, you have to share it, and to share your personal narrative, you have to trust everybody in the room that they're not going to use it against you, and you have to be extremely vulnerable to do it. American society isn't really a super vulnerable, welcoming society as far as like everybody should just bare their actual hearts to each other, right? We don't tend to do that. That would be another kind of barrier. I think that as far as people I have tried to communicate the information to, there really hasn't been any particular group that's had a hard time wrapping their heads around it. But to your point, Sean, there are a number of people who are like, I want numbers to back this up. So we do surveys and things where we find out, oh, we put out a comic that one of our students did, and we have a bunch of people across the spectrum of like politics and business and local government and levels of power and everything. We send it out, we have them read it, we have them take a really short survey. And we get numbers that are in the high 90% for people saying, oh, I totally understand this person as a different kind of person than I thought they were. When you said, oh, this is a comic written by someone who was in prison, somebody goes like, I don't know how I feel about that person. You get to the end of it, you go, oh, wow, this person's really like, not only do the injustices they've suffered feel valid, but they've owned some of the things that they've done wrong, and they've made themselves into an advocate for the community that is about, avoiding this in the future. And I think that's a lot of the power, is turning that into numbers. And then we have those numbers for the people who want the numbers, because somebody always wants numbers.
Yeah. Beautiful. So measure how many tears fell. That's how we know if they felt
exactly.
sad.
Quantify
how many red seas of tears are we talking before we can count it? Yeah.
Are you seeing a commonality in like what the common perception people have about those who've been incarcerated? Do we all kind of have an automatic assumption? Is this a common thing that you see?
I mean, I think it's undeniable. Like I couldn't speak authoritatively about it, but like we all have prejudices. That's a thing, right? It's the underlying understanding that you see, if I'm walking home at night and I see a group of men, regardless of age or race, coming toward me on the sidewalk, I might cross to the other side just because I don't know, we all have our things. I think that a lot of sort of the way that the correctional system works and the way that we perceive it, because of, we have so much media that's around crime and race and violence and how these things interact. And when you mix those three things together elementally, they make for really thrilling and dramatic stories, which is why like Law and Order and Chicago this and everything else, they're doing kind of the same stuff all the time. Like we're churning in the same sort of ideas about the way people are and the way communities operate. That's the thing to break through, is getting past the point where you go like, no, you got to remember, like, this person did a thing, yes, but they're also 22 years old, which means they're the same kind of like, I don't know about either of you, but when I was 22, I like to say this now to friends and reflect on, like, I was cosplaying an adult. Like my early adulthood was like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm performatively being an adult because I do have a job and I'm paying bills. But I'm also still like too much of a kid to know, you just don't have the wisdom. So a lot of it is that. It's sort of just getting people away from the idea that a criminal is a criminal is a criminal, right? The idea that, because I think the whole thing is supposed to be correctional system, like correctional means we find a problem, we correct said problem, and then, when they talk about rehabilitation and things like that too, we have to get our mindset around that as a thing rather than, well, this is a one and done situation. You have declared your purpose in society as this thing that we don't like, and therefore you're written off.
So even the language choice, I mean, we could look at Department of Defense becoming Department of War and what kind of effect that will have narratively.
That's a good point.
And especially if war means peace now. And
which is directly taken from 1984. If war means peace.
Exactly. That's the latest I heard, from 1984 being repeated like it's reality. And just the impact that has, even calling it the criminal justice system and calling people ex-convicts, right? And how do you see people, the ones who are rewriting their stories through this process, how do they take new ownership of their identity or the labels that they're using for themselves?
This is the hard thing, right? Because it's such an individual thing. To speak to ex-convicts, we don't classify all of ourselves as ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, even though we've almost certainly been in relationships and left them. That title doesn't stick with you the same way. Nor would it be like I'm an ex plumber because I worked with my dad in his HVAC business when I was younger. Like I don't have that label carried around. An ex-convict is a label, however, that follows you, right? It also requires declaration on job applications, all these kinds of things. It becomes a very complicated thing, and it becomes an albatross, and perhaps an intentionally imposed one. We don't have to debate that too much, but I think the thing about how you reframe is once you've sat down and you've gone through, okay, this is what happened. This is what I did and why I did it. And I understand that now. And I can talk about why I made the choice to break away from that. Then a lot of it comes to opportunity and it comes to community. And one of the things that we try to do at Brink and that we've been doing a lot more of is like a lot of our students end up becoming teachers in the program because the best way to communicate to that sort of community is through people who actually have that experience, right? Like we're not interested in this top-down kind of, we're here to save you from yourselves. You've all done bad. We have smart. We're going to fix it. Like that's not how it works. This is about the fact that we're all really on an equal ground in a lot of ways. Like life is literally just a series of choices, and sometimes you take a wrong path, and depending on when you take the path and how tough the choices are, like that path might leave you somewhere where you're completely lost, like you're cut off from everybody else. So to get the narrative to change is really a lot about not just helping them tell it, not just advocating and not just sharing the narrative, but also being the kind of organization that says, hey, you are part of a larger community and you do have opportunities to do other things. We have talked with some of our students just about things that they're interested in, and we try to connect them with resources so that they can do it. One of the students wanted to be a fashion designer, and we talked with her about like, well, let's see who Danny knows, and we can try to connect and figure out how we can get something going, even if it's just that you get mentored by someone who can tell you these are the fashion schools or the art and design schools that you should look at to go to, and here's the scholarships to apply for. But anything to create like the future pathways that make the change meaningful. Because obviously, you can say like, hey, let's trauma dump and then go back to yesterday and we'll just do that again, even though we sort of had a breakthrough moment, but we didn't break through anything in particular. So we're going to go back and start over. Yeah, we have to work on, ways to make sure that these breakthroughs and these sort of understandings of their individual turning points in their lives can change their life going forward. And that's a lot of what we try to do. Not everybody wants to follow up. Not everybody comes to, we'll do second round courses that are sort of master's class courses where it's like, let's go deeper into your creativity and into your story. You want to do something bigger, or you just want to pursue this more. We can offer that. And then we can also work with our partner organizations that also have a lot of sort of future pathway work and education work and job placement work and things like that. Because of course, like with the, hundreds of thousands of nonprofits in the country, like we need not reinvent the wheel for every single service. So it becomes like, how do you network people so that they get out of your thing and get into something else that continues them on an upward trajectory rather than regressing?
This is maybe a loaded question. It's definitely a loaded question. With what you're seeing, it sounds to me like really inspiring, incredible changes. You see people who feel like they haven't had choices, they haven't been presented other narratives, they fall into these cycles, and then they come to you and they're like, oh wow, I can change, I could see this a different way, and therefore I could see new opportunities for myself, and I feel understood and I'm more connected. Imagine if we could figure out a way to do this with left and right, or what's happening in the country. I guess where I'm going with this is, what would you hope to wave a magic wand? What would you hope to see with the work you're doing, how it could be applied on a broader scale for the country?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you've hit it. The thing that's tricky, and the thing that we see every single day now, like anybody who's paying even the tiniest amount of attention to the news or social media or anything, is that like discourse is impossible at this point. There doesn't appear to be, at least not a lot of public-facing conversation where people with opposing views are talking, and they're talking with the goal of solving the problem together. There's a lot of talking to be proven right, be proven wrong. There's a lot of talking to win or to lose, but there's not a lot of talking to go like, okay, well, this is great that you feel this way and I feel this way, and we need to get to somewhere that works for everybody and find the compromise. I would love to imagine waving that magic wand that the kind of stuff we do where it's about, hey, let's first sit down and center ourselves and be present in this moment and not entangled in all the other things that can inform a conversation, that can inform a political debate, that can inform all these other things, right? We're so often entangled in an incredible amount of history and prognostication and worry and greed and so many other things, right? Like the list is almost infinite, but there's so many elements that are at play that are so counterproductive to actually functioning, where people could sit down and go, you know what? I respect that you're alive. You respect that I'm alive. We have a problem we have to solve. You know, one of the people I was talking to recently was mentioning that, you know, when you grew up in a small town, you always had people who said things that you didn't agree with, but they would also be a person who would come over and they'd help you like fix your roof. And it was a thing, it became an exercise of like, well, I don't really have to listen to this guy about everything, but I am going to get him dinner because he helped me fix the roof, right? And that was a sort of less loaded situation. Everything is very loaded now, and I think there's obviously a narrative there, right? There's a narrative that is creating a lot of strife. But I think really if we could sit down, if there was the actual ability, and again, this requires magic, because I don't personally see a path to a point where it's like, oh, everybody's just going to like become fully serious individuals who are here for the right reasons to do the right thing. But if we wave that magic wand and people could sit down and go, okay, here's how I feel. Here's how I grew up. Here's why I feel the way I feel. Here's what all of this story that I have in my head about me and the way the world works. Here's how this is all tying into how I'm reacting to the things that are going on. And then not say that you're not allowed to react the way you want to react, but say, be fully self-aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that we get less caught up in the quibbles about the things we're saying. Because, you know, also not wrong to argue, like some people say atrocious things. Some things are, you know, some things are absolutely backed by fact. There's a lot of stuff where we can do that, but that argument is almost negating the valuable sort of discussion that's underneath it. Like we're chasing the wrong things. And I think that often what happens in a lot of these student stories is they will tell you, I was chasing the wrong thing. Like, you know, my dad was a big drug dealer. This is in one of the stories. One of our students' dads was like, he was a big drug dealer, and he thought, I'm going to follow in my dad's footsteps. This is great. Like, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I take this mantle on? And then his decision, he changed his path. You get a similar thing where it was also familial. Like, you'd be maybe unsurprised how often it is like, hey, you're modeled this sort of thing, and it's lucrative, and it's the easy job. And if you're in a place of desperation where like, well, my options are I can make a living amount of money by doing this thing that's technically illegal, or I go like get a fast food job, and I can't afford even an apartment by myself, or even half of an apartment with another person or whatever. Like, you start seeing some of the thought process of like, well, of course, like, who wouldn't take the path of least resistance to not being desperate and suffering? I think one of the fantasies I have, and this is another magic wand fantasy, is like, what if we just immediately poof, comments were no longer allowed on the internet? People could say whatever they want, but you can't react to it in any way. No emojis, no comments. And all it means is you would scroll through and be like, that person thinks that, this person thinks this person thinks this. But without the reaction churn, without all that stuff, without the narrative that has been constructed by social media algorithms and things like that, do people go back to the early days of social media where you didn't say inflammatory things because they got attention? You didn't need to do that because now it's like, well, I'm not here for anything but presenting myself. I'm not here on behalf of whatever group I align with whatever philosophy, whatever the argument of the day is, whatever the debate is. Like, it's interesting because we've allowed ourselves to be boiled down into sort of a slurry of humanity that just has to like scream in one direction or the other, rather than being like, no, I am this person who believes this, and I stand behind believing it.
I think that might have been something even the Tristan Harris, the Center for Humane Technology, may have recommended something like that at one point. It's like talking about getting rid of infinite scroll and talking about getting rid of comment or reactions on posts. I think a lot of us, we might start reading more or talking to people in real life instead of kind of getting sucked into this vortex. And so two things. One is, I think it would be really interesting. I don't know if Sean and I talk about media literacy a lot and like what does it actually mean, right? Yeah. And it makes me think of, what if we had people in a room, and that's what it was. Maybe that's what you're doing at Brink. It's just, having people say, here's what I believe, here's why I believe it, here's where I come from that makes me believe these things, and here's my reaction to this headline. And having some kind of, just that, like you said, that awareness, I think that would be so tremendously helpful if we could. It would have to be well facilitated so that there's no bombs in the room. But
yeah, genius. I mean, look at what social media is most of the time now. Like it lots of times it's just an evidently incorrect or inflammatory set of words, and then just people react to it, right? This goes into like there's like an NFL memes thing I follow where they just post the most outrageous thing, and it's like, this has nothing to do with football. This is making wild claims about this person and whatever their life is, and it's just so people will go off in the comments. There's no genuine or authentic or like givingly minded sort of action here. It is just to create the comments and the churn and the reactions. I think if you sat down with a group of people the way that we do and said, hey, let's all get to know each other. Let's make sure we all understand who each other are and we're comfortable around each other. And now we can talk about this thing. And you have a real conversation where, yeah, you can talk about the headline. You can talk about like, well, let's read the whole thing first before we start reacting, right? Like, social media is built on the idea that you just react to what's given to you for the most part. Very few people can read the whole thing because of paywalls and things like that. And so you just end up doing this cycle of, well, what's your worst, quickest take to this partial crumb of information that you've consumed? I mean, and that's like saying, oh, if I peer out my window one time and there's a person standing and looking at me, I should assume that they want to do something to me, right? Like, that's the kind of mindset that we're acting in, where it's like, no, you gotta stand and wait and go like, oh no, he's looking at his dog and he's walking by, and there's nothing insidious here. But we operate in this sort of weird, because everything has to be immediate, because it has to be shocking, because it has to be provocative, we're constantly trying to drum up anxiety in ourselves to get us to just behave more, to sit in the app, to keep scrolling, to do whatever.
Feed the system.
Yeah.
Also, I want to go back to that. I think it's so important when you're talking about how we can get along with people who have completely different viewpoints because we share a common goal. Like, let's just fix this roof. And I wonder what those could be for us as, like Americans. So I feel like we argue about these events that happen, who's at fault. And if we could hammer home a little bit more, like, what is it that we actually want to achieve? And we talked about before, like space race or something, but I don't know. Are there common goals you wish would be louder, or things that could help us overcome all this nonsense?
I mean, I would love if we framed the stuff that we're trying to accomplish, as a nation, as communities, whatever, around what do we want to see? Like, very rarely does anybody say, what is America to you? What do you want America to be? Because if you ask that question, you can't lead people as easily as if you tell them, America used to be better than this, or the economy should be like this and it's not, right? We spend a lot of time setting up these oppositional dichotomies, right? Where it has to be, you have to pick one side or the other. You have to say that, like, everybody deserves healthcare, or you have to earn healthcare. But there's not a thing in the middle where somebody says, what would the ideal healthcare system really look like? Like what would you want this to be? And then aggregating that information and going like, you know what? It turns out 80% of people aren't 80% of people think plastic surgery isn't the kind of healthcare that we all need to pay for together, but everybody here feels like if you break your leg, you should be able to walk in and have your leg set and taken care of, and you shouldn't have to spend $20,000, right? Or if you get cancer, you shouldn't have to be bankrupted with bills. And we kind of do that with opinion polls, right? Like opinion polls exist to do this, but they don't actually directly inform anything because, again, the way the narrative is often constructed is it's either got to be this or it's got to be this. You can either have Medicare for all or you can have freedom. You can either have guns or you cannot have guns. We don't talk about things in a way where it's like, well, what do we want? What do we want this to be? How do you want your school to work? How do you want this class to work? Like I said, that's one of the first things that goes on in our classes is like, how do you guys want to interact with each other? And how do you want to run this? Because if you go into any group of people, especially if they don't know you, and you say, this is how it works, pick A or B, they're going to immediately distrust you. And then you're creating an environment of just disagreement because there's going to be A's and B's. And those people then are like, well, why are you a B? That doesn't make any sense. We talked earlier. I thought you'd be an A. You get into this whole weird thing where we're not dealing with the nuance, right? Like our narratives as people are very complicated. And I think that we all walk around knowing that we have rich interior lives. Where like, if I'm walking through the grocery store, there's like a famous David Foster Wallace commencement speech where he talks about how like, hey, if you're in the grocery store and you hate how crowded the grocery store is, and you're exhausted and you just wish this baby wasn't crying and you don't want to be the 10th person in line and you just want to get home and eat. Remember that literally everybody else in the store is experiencing the same thing. You have to at some point go, every single person I pass on the sidewalk is going through something today. They could be winning, they could be having a terrible day, it could just be a totally baseline whatever kind of day. But they're having thoughts. Like no one is acting like it kind of goes in the protagonist syndrome thing that we get into too, which is like we're not individually the lead in some sort of play or movie of our choosing. Like everyone here is thinking and everyone here is feeling and everyone here is allowed to have a moment where they go, ooh, that rubbed me the wrong way, or I don't necessarily agree with that. And so to come to solutions with things, we actually have to start talking about what we want instead of what we don't want, or instead of what we're trying to prevent, or instead of what is the evil we're fighting, right? I mean, I think that's a lot of the narrative we're stuck with right now, is there's a form of evil. Which evil is it that you don't like, that you're trying to stop? And here's how we're going to stop that evil. But there's not a conversation about like, well, what's the source of the evil? What is this really like? Is there evil? Is this just a very minor disagreement? I mean, most of the time these same polls also show that like 70% of the country overlaps on most things. But we can't talk about the overlap because the overlap isn't the discussion that's interesting and it's not lucrative for fundraising and all sorts of things, right? So I mean, years and years ago, one of my friends and I were trying to put an app together that would be about this idea of just like have people answer question prompts about government. Like, what do you want America to be? How do you want, what do you think a house should cost? How much do you think someone should have to do to be allowed X amount of free time to themselves? What does liberty mean to you? Like these sorts of questions that instead of us debating the answers other people provide, we actually prompt all of us to come up with our own answers so that we're really thinking about it instead of just being stuck in a brand debate where it's like Coke, Pepsi. It's like, I don't care. I don't know what's in either Coke or Pepsi. Why don't you let me talk about a beverage that I think would be good? And let's see what flavor do we like? What's the actual, getting down to what matters.
You do hear these kind of debates, discussions on, we kind of don't know what the American dream is, but goodness gracious, even more so, we kind of don't know what the American story is, be it the lore, the power system, and all these other kind of aspects of the story. That's what I'm just thinking about right now.
Yeah. I think, we're obviously, we've been for the last, 15, 20 years in an ongoing conversation about what is America's story. Is it about bold patriots who defied a king and built something amazing that still stands, or is it about a bunch of mistakes made and genocides and slavery and all these oppressive things that has sort of led to a system that feels almost vaguely like a monarchy? And neither of those things are incorrect, which is part of the thing that's difficult, is that, again, it's like, well, if you have to pick either or, you're not going to get anywhere. And I don't think America or any individual should be a protagonist. I don't think that like we should think about ourselves that way, because I, I do think that there's a great value in, for the purposes of introspection and for the purposes of being like a person who interacts compassionately with others, realizing like I am incredibly insignificant, both in population now and in time and in the continuity of existence. And that doesn't devalue me, doesn't make me not a person. It's not insignificance like it doesn't matter what I have to say, but it's insignificance in like I will be a blip on the timeline of history. And so then it's a question of like, well, do you want your blip to be like a really like just fiery, angry blip? Do you want your blip to be one that like maybe people sort of remember you for doing some good? Like, and do you need to be the lead for that blip to matter? And I think that, I think that a lot of us, as we're growing up, we sort of need that, right? Because a lot of the way that life is framed in this country is that like, hey, you're gonna be smart and you can do anything you want and da da da. But and that all goes in the American dream thing. But it's not. I don't think that individual achievement is the goal. Like it's not that it's wrong to individually achieve. I think it's great. Like people should do things. Like people should do big things. They should make incredible things happen. But defining ourselves around those things is part of the problem. And I guess that's a personal narrative thing. I one of my least favorite questions at parties is, what do you do? Which implies, tell me about your job. And the thing is like, well, I mean, my jobs have seldom defined me. And even like, I love my work at Brink, but I don't think it's like my life defining job. Like all of the other things that I do, there's just more person there, right? And I think that we all have more person there than what, oh, I work the late shift at this warehouse. Like that isn't the whole story. And it does tend to play into, well, now somebody's going to process you on, oh, you work at a gas station. Cool. Now I have a bunch of notions about who you are. And it's like, well, that's not
Category.
really fair. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, getting away from thinking of ourselves as individual people who have to sort of like win another game, right? Or be the lead or be the hero. But that's really hard because like the reason so many stories have good versus evil, black versus white, whatever, is because that's really easy to tell. It's really, and it resonates. We like the simplicity of there being one side versus another side, and there's clear-cut reasons why you're on the side you're on. It's the reason why we gravitate toward a Star Wars, right? And it's the reason why something like Star Trek, older Star Trek anyway, may not grab the same people who like Star Wars, because
Star Trek is the best, just saying.
it is. It absolutely is.
That's my bias.
Because when you're telling stories about like, well, hey, we have to go to a place and we're not going to the place to like trash everybody or take what we want. We're going to the place to find out like, oh, they're having an interesting disagreement. How can we help? Right? Like, that might not seem like the most thrilling narrative, but it's also really important for us to remember, right? It's the same with like, I love old Twilight Zone, like the old Rod Serling Twilight Zone, for the same reason, because it gives you these morality plays. It packages, in a genius aspect of narrative, it packages these complex personal debates into something like, aliens are coming. Now your neighborhood is divided about who gets to be in the bunker and who doesn't, and everybody's name calling and they're doing these weird divisive things. What does that mean to you? And you start thinking about like all of these things are just they're reactionary pinpoints that we end up hitting over and over and over again because we're scared. That's the thing about life. Being alive is scary. It gets scarier the longer you're alive. Things start to hurt, they start to break, you start to worry about stuff. Life becomes expensive, you lose people, and as that goes on, you become a little more susceptible to being scared by someone. And if someone's willing to manipulate your fear, then they're going to have an easier time connecting you with their story, whether you would fully have connected with it when you were younger or not.
That's beautifully put. Is that the more afraid we are, the more susceptible we are to gravitating to a story we might not have otherwise, and especially if there's only two options presented to us. Are there any other like projects or books, or I know you talked about your book earlier, anything else that you would really love to share with people or drive people to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have a couple of other books. So the first book was called There You Feel Free. You might be able to find that somewhere. I also wrote a book called The Retroactivist, which is a like far future sci-fi satire under the idea that we've managed to, through automation and AI and robots, solve all of the problems that we have. And so the main character is just bored because he can't actually compare himself to anyone. Everybody has all the time in the world, so everybody can be an artist, everybody can be a dancer, everybody can be a musician, everybody can be an economist, whatever. And so he begins to go, well, how am I going to differentiate myself? I don't exist otherwise. And so it goes on to critique some of the ways that we've fixated on rugged individualism as a culture and things like that, talking basically about the protagonist level stuff that we were talking about before. And then my most recent book...
What was the name of that?
That one's called The Retroactivist.
Okay.
And then the most recent book is called One Person Can't Make a Difference, and it's a cyberpunk novel that's actually way more optimistic than the title. But it's basically about like how do you sort of function within a mega city hierarchy that has corporate and government sort of power players doing a lot of stuff. And our main character is a person who has had to sell almost all of his body parts, all of his organic body parts, and replace them with mechanical ones just to kind of pay the rent and survive. And so now he literally lives week to week, paycheck to paycheck, because he has to be physically like recharged as a battery. And so he's kind of drawn into some conflict. I tend to write a lot of stuff that is exploring a lot of the things that we've been talking about, so it's pretty convenient.
No, it's really cool, yeah.
And the only other thing is I also co-host a podcast called Debut Buddies, and it's a podcast about firsts. So it might be a historical first, like the first woman elected official who's like a mayor in Kansas. She was actually elected by sort of prevailing religious group at the time as a joke. They were trying to prove like, oh, a woman can't run things, so we'll elect her on purpose so that she crashes and burns. We also talk about things like the first David Lynch movie. We did a first Legend of Zelda episode. We'll be talking about the first star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame very soon. We kind of explore history that way and then talk about, because we don't often think about where these things start also. And I think that's an important part of the narrative. It's an important part of narrative in general for us to realize like, all these things had to start happening at some point, right? Like there was a first of a TV show. There was a first time that somebody said jaywalking is a crime now. So what's that about? Like, what's the origin of that? How tied it was to like the auto lobby of the time, and how like basically up until the early 1900s, people in cities would walk across the street wherever they pleased because the streets were for people and occasionally horse-drawn carriages, but not anything else. So people would just walk wherever. And at the point that cars started existing, people were getting in car accidents where they hit pedestrians and killed them a lot, to the point where people were kind of turning against the idea of having cars altogether. They seemed too dangerous. And so these automakers lobby gets together and they discuss like, well, what can we do? Because the issue here is we got to keep selling cars. So we have to make the people who cross the street seem stupid. So what they did was they took Jay, which was an insult at the time, which meant that you were an ignorant person who wasn't paying attention, and they tacked it onto walking. They created a word, a compound word, and they started branding people as jaywalkers. Well, you don't want to be a jaywalker because that means you're a dummy who doesn't know how to cross the street at the corner like you're supposed to. And now it's something that we all think about. Like, it's just, jaywalking is just a thing that I don't know anyone who's got a ticket for jaywalking in my life, but you always know that could happen because it's technically illegal to cross wherever you please.
That is amazing. I love this. Let's talk about stories that shape everything we believe and how we behave.
Yeah. And as we near the end of the episode, I feel like we just scratched the surface of you, Nate. Yeah, so we'll have to... I mean,
if you ever wish to have me back, I'll come back.
Nate, how can people find you and more about the organization?
You can follow Brink Literacy Project on social media. We have Brink.org on Instagram, and also Friction Series on Instagram will let you follow us on both aspects, so the actual nonprofit side and then the literary journal side. You can go to our websites. So brinklit.org is for the main site for the nonprofit. Frictionlit.org is for the magazine. And then we also have a new brinkstore.org where we sell the literary journal and the literary tarot. And we'll certainly have other things. We're working on little ideas like getting some of the student comic stuff into art prints and things, so that some of these really beautiful splash pages that happen, like we get the art in this journal is incredible every single time. Like we have such a talented creative team, so many really phenomenal editors. It's a glorious thing, really. Like it's just so much power put behind the idea that also, hey, the student story is in here alongside maybe a celebrity story. We're trying to create again this ecosystem where everybody's getting a seat at the table within our pages, and so that they get a seat at the table for anybody who opens the magazine, because now you're not just consuming the curation that feeds what you think you want. You're getting a little taste of everything.
Love it.
Amazing.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. Cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me.